Hello and welcome to Take Your Points, the show that discusses all to do with Ulster GA. This week's guests are former Tyrone player Jody Gormley and the Gaelic Life columnist Cahal Carvill. Okay, gents, well, let's get started with the chat about Division 1 first. So, Jody, we've had a lot of big games so far, but I want to know what you think of how Tyrone have got on so far in Division 1.
Yeah, I think it has been a big change in Tyrone with Fergal and Brian coming in as management. You can certainly see that they're attempting to play a more direct brand of football, and probably less emphasis on retaining possession but getting the ball earlier into the forward line. I think obviously with the lockdown they haven't really had that much time to work on it, but there's certainly signs that Tyrone could have a promising enough championship, albeit it's knockout, so they don't have much room for error.
That's right. Carl, what have you thought of Tyrone? You know, there was a lot of talk about them beforehand, and then there's also a lot of talk about Armagh, but do you think that they lived up to their expectations?
I think everyone was just glad to see Tyrone and Armagh and Donegal all back playing football as much as I was. With the change in management with Tyrone, I think there was massive expectations, but I think it was a bit like Arsene Wenger when he left Arsenal. They thought everything was going to be great once Mickey Hart turned over, and it maybe hasn't just turned out exactly like that. One thing which is quite peculiar, and I just haven't figured it out myself, is why they have Conor McKenna in the full forward line. You know, his direct brand of football on the 45, and maybe even further back. He was brilliant in his first year back from the AFL, and I think that's a natural position coming onto the ball is the position for him. So maybe I'm obviously not seeing training, and maybe Brian and Fergal see something different, but that's one area which I've been scratching my head at. But certainly they have the footballers. I don't know if Darragh Canavan, if he's going to be the second coming of God, as Joe Brawley likes to refer to, but I think he has shown in glimpses what he's capable of doing. But Pat Spillane once said I prefer a good big footballer as opposed to a good wee footballer, so I don't know come championship time whether he will fulfil his promise, but certainly it's an exciting time in Tyrone football. They were very good in patches against Armagh, and I think they're one of the teams that will be there or thereabouts come the end of the championship.
Jody, obviously you're from Tyrone. What did you think about the changeover of management? Like, whenever you lose a man of that sort of stature to...
Well, I mean, Mickey's record speaks for itself, but I think it was time for change, and I think it was, you could argue that maybe he should have got another year given the circumstances, but I think it's important to make a change whenever you have a good group of players together, so that it's not just, I suppose, like an Alex Ferguson scenario where the bottom falls out of the bucket and then you make a change. I think there are good players, and I think you can already see signs of what what the new management are trying to do. I think it's been very positive, Peter Hart moving into the half-back line. Certainly the last couple of games I think he's shown more of what he's capable of doing. With regard to Cahal's point about McKenna, I think we really don't know what's happening with regard to how well conditioned players are. Certainly when he came back from Australia, he seemed to be in fairly good condition. We don't know, is he at that level again? And then there's the Cahal McShane thing, like, how serious is his injury and how far on the road to recovery is he? So I think it's going to be interesting. I wouldn't be critical of the management at all. I mean, obviously being from Tyrone, it's easy to say that, but I would be supportive. If we look at Armagh, you could argue they're 7 years down the line. Tyrone are maybe a couple of months down the line. So I think there are a lot of positives, and I think Tyrone will be in the mix without a doubt.
What about the pressure from Tyrone? The Tyrone fans are passionate, so there's an expectation there.
Paddy O'Shea summed it up a few years ago, didn't he, about the Kerry animal? I think the Tyrone animal would be something similar. There's no doubt. I mean, there'll be a fairly polarised view already, I would imagine. In different quarters, if you look at social media, there are supporters and there are people who are very critical. But I suppose that's the beauty of the GA, isn't it? This gives everybody a forum and an opportunity to express an opinion, whether it's valid or not.
Well, how do you think and Logan will deal with that sort of pressure?
They're both highly accomplished men in their own sort of professional lives, and obviously Brian, lifted Sam Maguire himself. I don't think it'll be a big problem. They would have been fully aware of what they were getting involved in. They would have been aware of the fact that their head's on the block, sort of thing. And they have a good knowledge of the players in Tyrone, having taken the under-21s to Ireland a couple of years ago. They'll have that sort of belief in the players. I suppose Mickey sort of came from that background of success as well. It's hard to beat a bit of success to fall back on when times are hard. And the young players I think the young players are there. Obviously there are questions, and personally I like a knockout championship. It'll have different critics, but I think it's good. I think everything's out in the open straight away. You just have to go for it, and I think it's great for supporters. And I think we'll find out very quickly if the younger players, the likes of Dara, if he's up to it. And I mean, I've seen him play school football, and my suspicion would be that he most certainly is up for it.
Yeah. Jody saying about Armagh being 7 years down the line. What did you read into the Armagh's performances so far in the league?
From where I suppose they were and coming up into Division 1, and to be fair, a lot of people thought they were going to be potentially the whipping boys when they went up, and it is a big leap, something similar to Antrim and the hurling. When you take that step up to Division 1, every Sunday is a battle, and there's no easy games, but I thought they've acquitted themselves very well. It was just unfortunate with the number of injuries that they picked up, and I think this is a theme throughout the various leagues and coming back after lockdown, and it was flagged early that coming into the league games, when you're not used to that full impact, that bodies are going to creak a wee bit, and I think Ian Faulkner is probably the biggest loss from an Armagh perspective. But I did hear that there's 6 hamstring injuries from various players in the Armagh setup as a result of coming back, and maybe that's the style of play. There's a lot of hard running, and I think certainly towards the end against Donegal they ran out of steam a wee bit, and Tyrone as well, and that hard running game is very difficult to maintain for 70 and 80 minutes now with the amount of extra time that's being played. So that's sort of maybe a bit of an issue when it comes to the injuries. But no, the O'Neill brothers have been very, very good. Rian maybe just hasn't discovered the form that he had last year, but Oisín's been really, really impressive, and I think he's got a big summer ahead of him. And if we can keep them boys ticking over and what they've been doing over the past couple of years, and for Cross in the actual senior football in Armagh, they've been earmarked as special players for a long time, and I think this year certainly with Oisín he's shown what he can do, and then Rian I think will come back into form come championship time. So I think it is bright future in terms of Armagh, but this is not the first season, second season under McGeeney. He's been there a long time, and if they don't start producing something in terms of maybe getting to an Ulster final or maybe winning an Ulster, there certainly will be question marks, because there's a lot of resources going in there, and obviously with the disruption with COVID etc, but you can't excuse that when you're 7 years down the line. You want to see playing Division 1 football is great, but you want to see something a wee bit more, and that's obviously what everyone's striving for in Ulster. But there's a bit more pressure on Armagh now, given the good performances that they have put in.
Jody, what did you take from that? The injury issue and.
Yeah, I agree totally with Cahal, and I think the ground has been very hard, and teams have come in, and whilst you could argue that's not a championship pace and maybe teams are holding back, I'm not so sure. They've been sort of out of football for a while, more than normal, and they're coming back in, and they've probably done a lot of conditioning by themselves, non-contact, straight line running or whatever sort of stuff they've been doing. But the ground is very hard and it's very fast, and most teams now are playing, as Cahal said, a hard running game, and it does take its toll. And there's no doubt, even I see it at club level, the number of players who are picking up hamstring injuries that probably for a number of years you wouldn't have really have seen that many players, because it would have been well conditioned over a longer period of time, but now they're straight in and it's 100 mile an hour football. So the window was fairly small, but I suppose it's needs must, and how do you tell players to take it easy once they go onto a pitch? They're fighting for a position. I think Armagh, the big question mark over Armagh I think remains from last year. They've played well for maybe 60 minutes in the game, and then it's the last 10 minutes, whether it's fitness or whether it's a mental attitude or whatever, they seem to just get caught a wee bit at the end. And I think if they can overcome that sort of last 10 minutes hurdle, I think there could be a formidable challenge. They put up a good battle against Tyrone. And I think they have a number of players that maybe don't get the credit. The likes of Jamar Hall works exceptionally hard, and he's good at closing down some of the marquee players. The likes of Ren McHugh didn't get much change really out of him. So I think he's somebody that'll come under the radar. But I do agree, if Stephen Faulkner doesn't make championship, he's a massive loss, because obviously he can play full back or full forward. I mean, it's my understanding he's probably one of the most prolific forwards in Armagh at the minute. So, it's great to have a player like that, but you need him on the pitch, similarly to suppose to Michael Murphy at Donegal, like Armagh, the same team without Faulkner at the minute. The way he's playing, he's not the captain, but he's probably the leader, mentally and physically.
You mentioned Donegal. Would you want to just get your thoughts on Donegal there? Scary to see Michael Murphy on the sideline, but what have you thought of them in general?
I think they're maybe suffering a bit of a hangover from last year. They were a formidable force, and everybody was speaking about them before the Cavan game. Nobody gave Cavan a prayer, and I think that has rocked them a wee bit. It has possibly dented their confidence, and possibly other teams aren't as afraid of maybe Donegal as they were. I mean, they're a significant team, and there's no doubt they'll be hard to beat. But without Murphy, I don't think they carry the same threat, and there's absolutely no doubt they're not as forceful or as direct without him. He's a massive player and has been for a number of years. And it's disappointing because against Tyrone, I thought he was exceptional, and he's almost unmarkable on this day. And it looked like he was hitting top gear again. I mean, what is he? He must be 30 anyway, is he? Or around that mark, like so. How many more years will we have? I mean, he's a great player to watch, even as a Tyrone supporter. I mean, you want to see the best players playing, and Murphy's up there, with the all-time best players.
Cahal, what do you think? You think that Donegal are in trouble now that Murphy might not be in the mix, or do you think that they have?
Well, I think any team would be in trouble without Michael Murphy. But when I saw that he had been injured, I was thinking, there's a man who is never injured. Like, think it down through the years for the past decade. How many championship matches has he missed? And even going back to when he was playing in Letterkenny, as a 16, 17-year-old, he was frightening. He was a man-child back then, and he was never injured again. And he's played the whole way through, and there's a lot of miles on the clock. And but at the end of the day, he's a talisman. He drives that Donegal team. Like, I was talking to a couple of the players I'd be friendly with that, played with him under Jim McGuinness, and when he was made captain, there was maybe a few eyebrows raised outside of Donegal. But the guys that played with him, the likes of the Declan Walsh, he was the man that was driving the trainings. He was the man that was driving the hard run. He was the man that was driving the older players to be better at that age. And he's been the driving force behind Donegal since then. So without him, I think Donegal will definitely have lost that fear factor in terms of other teams coming across them. And we need to think about Murphy. Obviously, they've got really, exceptional players outside of him, like Paddy McBrearty. He certainly took up the mantle against Armagh, and when the backs were against the wall, everyone looked to him, and he did come up trumps. But he can be found out in games and snuffed out by some of the top teams. I think Donegal are going to be a force. Owen Bongeller coming back as well, starting to get to that form. Oren McNeilis coming back in, after his year out. They have a lot of quality players there, but without Murphy to link all that together, are they a threat to the big teams? I thought last year in the Ulster Championship against Cavan, he seemed like he needed a bit of a break, I sort of thought. So maybe this might be a blessing in disguise. But Donegal, certainly no team will want to draw them later on in the championship. But I think the big teams, the likes of the Dublins, Kerry, Tyrones, and even Derry now, I don't think they'll fear them.
The other Division 1 team was Monaghan, who had a funny sort of campaign in their first three games. They didn't look good, and then they looked good. And what did you take from there? I know the Monaghan boys quite well. Just living beside them, I suppose, and I think they aren't a team that are in transition. And sometimes when I talk about one, I think they've been in transition for 4 or 5 years at this stage. But they have the ability to light up the championship. Like McCarthy, his hat trick in the first half against Donegal. It was one goal was better than the other, and they do have, with the Hughes brothers, a real good engine in the team. But I predicted actually that last year they would wipe the floor with Cavan in the championship, but obviously that didn't happen. It was obviously a drawn game after full time. But I think Monaghan will be thereabouts again, a tough team to beat. But in the business end of the season, I just think they maybe are lacking that bit of quality that some of the other teams with the likes of Tyrone and maybe even Armagh now have. But it'll be interesting to see. Maybe the league, given the changes with COVID, etc., and the ban with Banty, etc., that might have impacted them more than we know about. But come championship time, obviously they'll be a tough team to beat. But I just don't think they lack that bit of quality. Okay. It sometimes feels like Monaghan, they lose the games you expect them to win, and then they win the games you expect them to lose. What have you thought? You share those opinions?
Well, certainly last year, I suppose everybody was tipping them to beat Cavan, but not to go off Monaghan. But I mean, Cavan are a real dog, if you pardon the expression. They just don't go away, and I would still think there's a kick left in them when they get everybody back fit. And again, we don't know how teams' preparations have been going with regard to the lockdown and COVID, and some teams have been training better than others. So But Monaghan, I think maybe they're still a wee bit dependent upon McManus when it comes to the big day, and he's fairly high miles now, and he's an outstanding performer, obviously proven record, but I still think they need him, and it's okay scoring hat-tricks and all the rest in National League matches, but it's Ulster Championship, something different. If we get a bit of a crowd into games or whatever, that's when when you really find out about players. Monaghan, I would agree with Cahal, they probably missed a chance, against Tyrone in the All-Ireland semi-final. I think that was their time, and Tyrone just got over the line that day. The Hugheses have been around a long time too. You still have the backbone of the team, but they haven't really managed to achieve. Whereas Cavan have come out of nowhere, and I'm sure that's a sore point with them now. Cavan won the Ulster title last year, and they'll remind them of it. So, you wouldn't want to draw them, but you would fancy them more than. I think Armagh have probably stepped ahead of them now, but then it's easy sitting talking in the studio.
Indeed it is. Moving away from Division 1, what about the other Ulster teams, Jody, that have been playing this year? Was there anybody stood out in particular for you? I know you've former manager Antrim, but is there anybody else or anybody
I think
at all?
Derry, I wouldn't say they've come out of nowhere, but I think they've really caught my eye, and not that I would be any great Derry fan historically, but you'd have to appreciate what they're doing, and certainly, Rory Gallagher has stepped them up this year. From talking to boys, I think Conor Glass has had a positive impact. I suppose he's bringing his know-how back from professional sport, and he seems to be playing at the level that he was a couple of years ago before he left. Obviously it's taken him a while, but it seems now that he seems to be a driving force, and you've got the Slough-Neil boys still there who, have plenty of know-how. I think they'll, the Ulster Championship's in a very healthy position at the minute, and it's certainly, Shane McGuigan. There's a number of players there that can step up and can hold their own. Again, we don't know how they'll compete against the Division 1 teams, but I think they'll add to the occasion when it comes.
Were you surprised with Derry, Cahal?
Not really, to be honest with you, because Rory Gallagher, knowing his sort of background and knowing the level of preparation he puts into a team and the level of commitment he demands from a team, I think last year against Armagh it was certainly a sore point for them when they were beaten up there, but he's gone away, and the guys have done a lot of work during lockdown, and you can see the teams that have really put in the effort, like the likes of Down and Fermanagh are a wee bit behind, and I just obviously with the ban with Paddy Tally, I don't know how that's impacted Down's preparations, but certainly Derry have been going full steam ahead during lockdown. The players have obviously taken individual ownership of their fitness, and they're coming out and they're specimens of men. They really have put a lot of work in, whereas in years gone by, some of the, maybe it's a softer underbelly of the Derry team, and I think they've added a bit of steel to that, and Rory Gallagher's come in with his know-how and added to that fitness, and they've always had good footballers, there's no doubt about it, but I think Derry have certainly been the most impressive team, probably one of the most improved teams in the country, I would say, at this stage.
Any other teams, Cahal, that have stood out from other than the ones we spoke about? Any surprise? I'm not saying good or bad.
Well, I wouldn't call it a surprise, but I have a soft spot for Antrim, and Paddy Cunningham was in here with us a number of months ago, and it was just great to see him, and he maybe gives a bit of hope to the old boys still playing. But at 36 or 7 to be able to come on, and one of the guys described he's a left foot that would open a bean can, and some of the scores, I think it was especially against Sligo when he hit that one on the outside of the boot again in Fortress Corrigan Park. The new Galatasaray home for Antrim, they've been really impressive, and I've enjoyed watching them, to be fair, and it'd be great to see them getting out of that division and making those improvements. There's a lot of effort going into football and hurling within Antrim and within Belfast especially, so I've enjoyed watching them. I haven't enjoyed watching Down at all. I don't know where they are. They've great teams, the likes of Kilcoo and Byrne and Mayo Bridge, the very celebrated club teams, but they haven't been able to put it together, and obviously the ban and COVID and all of that disruption didn't help their preparation, and I think they're a couple of months behind some of the other teams. So, and Fermanagh as well I just don't know where the McManaman project is going over there. Fermanagh obviously have a small pool, etc. But with some of the guys that have left the team, the likes of Ryan Jones, Tomas Corrigan, I would question, why Fermanagh can't get those players out playing. Obviously, it's a choice for an individual, but Fermanagh need all of their best players out to compete. And I would fear for both those teams come championship time.
Do you share those sentiments, Jody, or what do you think? What do you think of the likes of Fermanagh and Down?
Yeah, if we go back to Derry first, Ronan, I think Derry. You could draw parallels with Derry to Donegal really before the Jim McGuinness era. They've plenty of good footballers there. They've players who've won, Macquarie Cup medals. They've won Hogan Cup medals. They've won with Slaughtneil. They've a lot of very accomplished footballers, very good footballers, and maybe Rory now has happened to pull them all together. And they could be formidable. With regard to Down, I suppose Down are probably lacking experience. They don't have any really established players. Some of their older players, like the likes of Kevin McKiernan, has been there a long time now. Jared McGovern's come back in, but they're lacking sort of experience through the team. That maybe some of the other counties have to fall back on to help younger players. So they're really in it, and Paddy Talley has identified that as a problem. So they're bringing a lot of young players in at the one time, and they've nobody really to turn to. They've no real anchor in the team to guide the younger players on. I think that's a challenge, and it's going to be an ongoing challenge for them. With regard to Fermanagh, you'd have to question why players don't want to play. And again, it's easy when you're outside of the county and you're outside the fold. It's only supposition or whatever, but there's challenges there for Ricey. There's no doubt about that.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to move on to talk about attacking football. So because you're talking about Derry, and Derry now the powerhouse of attacking in Ulster football. What do you think about Brawley in our paper has spoke about how he thinks that the defensive football is gone now and teams are embracing this attacking football, and if Rory Gallagher's doing it, then everybody should start doing it. Do you think we're in a situation now where we're going to move away from defensive football, or is this just is the test cases too small? Or?
I agree with you. The test case probably is too small. There's no doubt. I think football has changed, and it has been changing slowly over this past number of years. I think teams now are pressing higher on the kick out. They're putting more pressure to stop the attack at source rather than allowing conceding the kick out. And I think that's made a big difference. Teams realise that, I suppose, particularly some of the Division 1 teams realise if you're going to compete with Dublin, you have to have a more attacking game. It's not just good enough to set up defensively, because Dublin have that nut cracked now. So Dublin have almost forced the change, and that teams are thinking, well, if for us to compete, we have to have more than just a strong defensive system. But I still think that when it comes to the Ulster Championship, teams aren't just going to go gung-ho. I know Armagh did a few years ago, I think it was under Paul Grimley, where they said, we don't like defensive football, we're just going to go man-to-man, and you're going to get caught out. Football is set up now to encourage more scores with the forward mark. So I think there's going to be a balance. Teams will probably press high for the most part, but will get bodies back. And players are, despite the fact that a number of players are picking up injuries, players are highly conditioned now, and they're able to get up and down the pitch. So they'll press high, but I still think they'll get back and do their defensive duties. They'll not just say, right, we'll try and outshoot them. You can even see Kerry are trying to develop a defensive system, and I think if they do, and maybe the time may be against them, but if they do, I think they're probably going to be the main contenders, to face Dublin.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think we've seen the back of a zonal defence by any stretch of imagination.
So it's too simplistic to say then that the attacking football's going. You're saying then that's really what we're seeing is a development of football into having more systems, more nuance to people's teams.
Yeah, it's sort of an organic development, sort of driven by the need to figure out how to beat Dublin. And teams are of the realisation that you're not going to beat them just setting up defensively. Yeah. You maybe keep the margin of defeat down, but that's about it. So I think it certainly has encouraged teams to be more forward-looking and to figure out how to get the ball from the defence to attack faster. So that'll encourage more kicking. I suppose the forward mark, whilst it's much maligned, I think it probably has encouraged that. There's a benefit now to a forward getting the long ball, and you can certainly see, I think, from Tyrone's play this year, it looks like Tyrone are certainly trying to get the ball into forwards, and the likes of Darren McCurry is benefiting from that. And if you had Cahal McShane in there beside him, I think it would further develop that type of game within Tyrone, but also within other teams.
Cahal, do you sort of agree with that sort of sentiment?
Well, I don't agree with the forward mark. First, I think it's an abomination of Gaelic football, but I don't know. I wouldn't be a fan of all these tinkering and changes to the rules. Like football, like anything, is organic. It's going to change. It's nearly like the seasons. One season it could be defensive, and then like Dublin with their play. Not that they play defensive, but they play man-on-man type of defending. But if you see the runners coming from like against Kerry, they always had a Dublin player with them the whole time, so they weren't creating that overlap. So it's a slight nuance to the just standing back and marking space that other teams have, and the likes of Fermanagh have been adopting. Because you mark space instead of the man, you're going to get cut open, and that's what's been happening to some of the teams that aren't, or maybe less developed in terms of that defensive system. But I think also it's a bit like when the cattle get out of the shed come springtime, they're running down the field and the legs being kicked in the air, because I think everyone's just been so glad to get back out to be playing football. There is that bit of adventure and a bit of joy and a bit of fun in terms of football, and maybe they're trying things that they wouldn't have previously tried, and why not? That's what football's all about, expression, and we don't like these dire games where there's 9 points to 10 points or whatever. We want to see that type of expression. But I agree with Jody, come Ulster Championship time, the stakes will go right through the roof, and some of the players and some of the teams will revert back to type, I think, and won't be as adventurous or expressive, because they'll be concerned about that criticism. What if I make a mistake that's going to lead to X, Y and Z? And I think the teams that will ultimately succeed this summer are the teams that throw those shackles off and say, no, we're good enough. I back myself, I back the man beside me, I back my team to go and play football, to express ourselves, to show our skills. And those teams that go back into their shell will ultimately be found wanting, I think.
Yeah. So just moving on, because you're in Jody, obviously a teacher, I wanted to ask you about what you thought of how kids are handling not being able to play this year. So we've had a whole year of kids not being able to play any colleges football, and what sort of effect that's been having on them.
As Cahal said, the kids were certainly like cattle kept in for the winter. I know in the Abbey we're playing every day with the kids out on the pitches, and they're just loving it. You can see the smiles on their faces. It's great. You would question what was the great need to stop sport. It's been highlighted in different forms of media, and I would certainly support that view. It hasn't helped kids to keep them locked up, as it were. I think in terms of their development in football, the only saving grace is that it's been the same for everybody. So none of the kids have had the opportunity to develop. But certainly I think schools football is very important. It gives kids the opportunity to play against lads from other schools, from other counties, and the better players will be playing against those fellas at county level all the way through, sort of minor, under 20 or whatever grade it happens to be at the time, and senior football. So they gain a lot of experience, and it can help them develop their confidence and self-esteem. So I think they've missed out on that. And if you're one of the schools that's had probably one of your better teams, you've missed out on an opportunity maybe to compete for McCrory Cup honours. I know last year it was shared between Maharans and Coleman's, but I'm sure it was a big disappointment for those lads. The pinnacle of their school football career, and they worked so hard to get there and then didn't get the opportunity. And the same this year. We've lads who've won a couple of Ulster titles, and they would have felt that they would have been competing with the likes of St Coleman's and Mahara this year, and they didn't get the opportunity. So it's a disappointment. But I suppose in the grander scheme of things, life goes on, and they're back playing football now, and they're back playing for their clubs. So it's really onwards and upwards, really.
Cahal, you played colleges. How would you have felt if you had kind of?
Oh, I'd have been devastated. There's no doubt about it. When I think back to my year in 2005, Kilkeel beat us in the semi-final with a great Marty Clark, scored a goal and broke our hearts down in Carrickcruppen. I'll remember it vividly, and I should have had a penalty before that, but we'll just not go there today. But these are memories that you keep for the rest of your life, and the friendships you make in McCrory and McLaren football, and they always stick with you. And I even was watching Sean Calvin and Lochran Gale a couple of months ago, when they showed in 2000 the last time St pots Armagh won the McCrory, and the goal he scored, and talked about that was the pinnacle of his life up to that point, you know. So, and he would put it up there with his All-Ireland win. So it's a special year, and you know, my heart does go out to those players that didn't get to experience that. But as Jody says, life goes on. You're back playing, you're fit and you're healthy, and that's the main thing. I just question the sense in terms of the powers that be that took that away from those players and the amount of effort that would have been put into it. I just don't understand, but you know, that's a conversation for another day. But certainly, you know, you look back fondly, like your school years, in my opinion, are the best years of your life, and not to get to play at the pinnacle with your teammates and your friends, it's very, very disappointing for the players. But they need to just refocus and, you know, look to the club, and life goes on, as they say. But yeah, disappointing for the lads.
Just finally, to wrap it up, I wanted to talk about Antrim, the Antrim hurlers. What did you think of their performance there against Wexford? You know, at Galatasaray's ground. Were you surprised, shocked, or did you expect that performance?
Oh, I know. On social media, Donegal was getting a lot of messages and quotes, and that his comment after the Joe McDonagh final last year was continually being replayed. But to be fair to him, I think he was right at the time. Now, and similar to Derry, I think Gleeson's got the Antrim guys, and he's taken them away, and during lockdown they've done a lot of work. The first day out against Clare, I think that was an ideal start for them, the way Clare's preparation and all of the murmurings and the talk around what's happening in the county, and that trip up from Ennis, you know, it's I've done it myself going the other way, but it's a serious trip. Coming up to Galatasaray is always going to be difficult, and to be fair to Antrim, they outplayed them and they deserved their win. They backed it up to an extent against Kilkenny and played very well. It was hard to keep the momentum going for 3 weeks in a row against Dublin, and Dublin are a very strong team, and with the likes of Liam Rush coming back in at 6, they're playing very well. You know, they're a strong outfit. But the litmus test was against Wexford back up in Belfast. Wexford had been, you know, flattering to deceive to an extent, but you know, with the and I know a couple of guys that were at the match, you know, with the fans back, there was a real carnival atmosphere. The weather was great, and they put on a brilliant performance. Now, if Lee Chin had had his shooting boots on, you know, it was about 4 points he missed in the second half towards the end of the game, which is uncharacteristic. But at the end of the day, you know, some of the play from the likes of McManus when he flicked that pass for the goal, you know, if it was Joe Canning did it, you'd be eulogising about it for the next decade. But and then the point at the end, you know, the balls of steel from the Antrim boys to put it over at the end, you know, it was brilliant to see. And what I like about it, you know, that momentum that's building in Antrim and in Belfast and like St John and those clubs, you know, where guys are taking the stick out and they want to, you know, play like McNaughton, or you know, they want to play like their heroes that they now get to see in Corrigan Park. So that can only be a good thing for Antrim hurling. And with a game to go, if you were to say to me, you know, Antrim will be safe in Division 1, I would have been shocked. But at the end of the day, fair play to them.
And Jody, just final point, what do you think a good performance from the Antrim hurlers means for the county of Antrim? Like, you know,
I think it's very important, not just for hurling, but for the GAA in Antrim. I mean, there's a lot of work been put into football and hurling, and you know, with the population, I think it's important that people have something to support and aspire towards. I mean, the term sleeping giant has been bandied around for a long time, but the results that Antrim have produced so far, I mean, certainly would suggest that the giant is certainly starting to stick his head up a wee bit. You know, if we could just get Casement Park sorted out, I think they could get onto a bit of a roll.
Big time. So thanks for coming in, Jody. Cahal, thanks for coming in.
Thanks a lot, Ronan. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ronan. All the best.